we'll go ahead and get started. So we are here today for our California Sea Grant Biennial Request for Proposals informational webinar. My name is Leon Gua. I'm the Research Program Supervisor, probably more easily known as the Research Coordinator for California Sea Grant. And I'm also here supported by my colleagues as well as our director. So I'll just briefly introduce them and maybe they can wave, but we have our director, Shauna O, on the call. We have our fellowship program coordinator, Delaney Medina, and then our Marine Debris Staff Research Associate, Tanya Torres. And we're really glad to see all of you here today. We had a lot of folks register, so we're excited to give more of an overview of our request for proposals that was launched a couple of weeks ago, answer your questions, and yeah, hopefully just get a sense of what people are seeing as they're looking at our request for proposals. So I'll progress through our slide. So just a quick note is that all of the information that we're presenting today is accurate as of today's presentation. So the timeline and details are subject to change, and any updates that are made to our request for proposals, which we abbreviate to RFP for short, are going to be listed on our website. So Tanya's going to help in dropping some helpful links as we go through today's presentation, but we just encourage you, while some people like to PDF the RFP or PDF the slides and look at those, we always recommend referring back to our live webpage because that will always have the most up-to-date information. And I also just quickly want to note, and I'm sure many people have questions about this, is that, of course, the RFP itself is funded by federal funds from NOAA. And so obviously the situation with federal funding right now is developing very quickly. And so at this time, we are moving forward business as usual. As long as our Sea Grant funds are congressionally appropriated, this RFP should go through. But if that changes at any time, we will do our best to notify all potential applicants as quickly as possible. So just some guidelines. We have automatically muted everyone, but if we notice that you're muted and it's a time where we're speaking and we want to make sure we reduce background noise, we might be muting you, but you're welcome during our Q&A sessions to raise your hand or unmute and ask questions at that time. We do have the opportunity to use captions. If you would like to see some captions, there's a button that says show captions toward the bottom of your screen. We're also using a Q&A functionality today. So you can pose questions at any time by submitting those to the Q&A box, and then we'll have those to access to answer as we go through. And it also is really helpful to us because it can inform our FAQ document that we have on our RFP as well. We are recording this presentation, so the recording is going to be posted on the California Sea Grant RFP website to refer back to. And if you do have any specific questions, that are really hyper specific to your situation or, might be more sensitive in nature, feel free to reach out to us via email and we will get back to you directly that way. So this morning, I'll be going over first an overview of the funding opportunity. We will then talk about our review process that we use here at California Sea Grant. I will orient you to a couple of elements of the full proposal that we often see folks have challenges or make errors with, just to kind of ensure that folks who may not be as familiar with our application process are aware. And then I will be pausing throughout to provide opportunity for timely questions, but if there's additional questions at the end, we have some time, hopefully at the end, to continue answering those as well. All right, so let's go ahead and launch into our funding overview. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with California Sea Grant, we are an organization that is based at UCSD, Scripps Institution of Oceanography. It is a federal university partnership. So our Omnibus Award provides funding for our entire program, but we also work very closely with the university and with a number of other state-based entities to carry out our mission. And so our mission for the 2024 to 2027 omnibus time period is this: to provide the information, tools, training, and relationships needed to help California conserve and sustainably prosper from our coastal and marine environments. And our program has been doing this type of work, connecting communities with information and resources throughout coastal California for over 50 years. Our main functional areas that we work in include providing grants and funding, such as through this opportunity. We also run a wide number of fellowships. We create communications and do extension work through doing research and outreach, again, with coastal communities. So very, very wide array of work. And we invite you to learn more about it on our website, which is CACgrant at UC or ucsd.edu. And maybe, Tanya, you can also put that in the chat. I realize I don't have that in our notes to share. So we as a program serve all of coastal California. So we are really, our home base is in San Diego. As you can see, there's a lot of faces down in San Diego, but we have extension specialists and staff research associates distributed throughout the coast, throughout the state. And so it really gives you a sense of the fact that we do have people in each of these places seeking to do work that serves coastal communities locally. I also just want to highlight that we have a sister program, USC Sea Grant, that serves the greater Los Angeles area, and their focus is on the urban ocean. They also have an RFP out right now. So if that's an area that you are working in, that might be a good one to take a look at. We serve then the rest of the coast. So today's funding opportunity, I'm just going to talk about a couple of the eligibility requirements and the types of things that would be eligible for funding through this particular RFP. The name of the LA sister program is USC Sea Grant, or University of Southern California Sea Grant. And yes, thank you, Delaney. So first off, we just want to highlight that we are funding applied research through this opportunity. So the definition that is included in the RFP is that this is original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge, directed primarily through a specific practical aim or objective. This is a fairly broad definition of what applied research is, but we do want to be very clear that this is a research funding opportunity. We also have a very intense focus on community engaged research for all three of the research tracks that are included in this opportunity. So this means that the research is led by, developed with, and or benefiting coastal communities in California. And then finally, all of the research must benefit one or more of our focus areas as laid out in our strategic plan and the solicitation priorities. And those are going to be specific to each of the research tracks that we're going to be going over, but the research has to address these in order to be eligible. And then as far as applicants themselves, the language is listed in our RFP, but the eligible applicants for this competitive grant program include California-based public agencies, Native American tribes, tribally led entities, public or private universities, or nonprofit corporations. All of the projects need to benefit California, and the entities need to be able to receive federal funds because, again, that is the funding source that we have available to provide funding. I mentioned earlier our strategic focus areas, so these are also shown on this particular slide. We have decided to focus on our sustainable fisheries and aquaculture focus area, as well as the resilient communities and economies focus area. So I'm not going to read through the entire text of the goals, but it's very important to take a look at these goals, at the strategic plan, and understand what exactly these goals mean and how your proposed research project would fall into these. But generally speaking, the first goal for each of these is talking about generating information co-production of knowledge. And the second goal is about how you take that knowledge and bring it into decision-making, policy-making, management processes. We have 3 different research tracks. We are trying something new with this RFP. Instead of having separate request for proposals. We are having a single request for proposals with different tracks. So this year's research tracks include an Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture Award, the Graduate Research Fellowship, which we have run several iterations of the past couple of years, and then the Cultivate Awards, which is a community engaged seed grant focused around relationship building, community building. The award dates for all of these are going to be the same. They are for up to 2-year awards starting in February of 2026. So we are running a competition this year for money that is starting next year and can run for up to 2 years. Now, there's a lot of information and text included in the actual solicitation website, and I don't want to waste your time by, just reading through things that you can read yourselves. So I'm going to try and keep these summaries fairly high level, but of course, if you have any questions about the details of these, you are welcome to submit questions. You are welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to answer those. So for the Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture Research Awards, these are projects that specifically that address Indigenous goals and objectives specific to our sustainable fisheries and aquaculture focus area. They should center Indigenous methodologies, protocols, and values in research. And it does require the participation of at least one California Native American tribe or tribally led entity, and they do not have to be federally recognized tribes. The award amount for these are for up to $150,000 per year. We do require a 25% of that total amount that you are requesting in non-federal funds as match or cost share. We do have some resources in our website about ideas of how you can get match because there's often, some groups have challenges in identifying what can be used as match, but you'd be surprised actually how broadly match can be provided, including in-kind services or volunteer time, et cetera. So we're happy to speak with you if you are finding challenge in getting this match requirement as is listed in the solicitation. And then we are expecting to fund 2 to 3 projects in total for this particular research track. Next, we have our Graduate Research Fellowship. So this is supporting graduate students engaged in applied research that furthers the sustainable fisheries and aquaculture or resilient communities and economy strategic goals. It is for full-time master's and PhD students at any California academic institution who are engaged in coastal and marine research relevant to California. And it does require working with a research mentor at the same institution that the graduate student is at, and working with a community mentor. And together, they should be providing a great hands-on experience for students in translating research results to coastal and marine communities. This award amount we've increased since the last round that we competed this to up to $50,000 per year. We again had that 25% match requirement in non-federal funds, and we may fund up to 10 projects, 10 fellowships for this opportunity. And then the final research track is the Cultivate Awards track. So this is to support transformative collaborative research projects that are driven by and or addressing the needs of California coastal communities. It is meant to focus on relationship and trust building around community-driven research topics that fall within that sustainable fisheries and aquaculture and resilient communities and economies focus areas. It requires the participation of at least one community partner, and we would expect that the deliverables from these projects are going to serve as a meaningful launching point for continued collaboration among the project team. So that might be a grant proposal, it might be a publication, it could be any number of things, as long as it's well justified as to why that's a good deliverable to have for your group. These can be for up to $100,000 per year, again, for up to 2 years. We have decided to waive the match requirement for this particular track, and we will be funding up to 5 of these projects. So I'm going to pause there and just see if we have any timely questions. I don't see anything in the Q&A yet.
Leon, there was a question as it pertains to meeting the strategic goals for each of the three categories that I answered in a direct message. But if you wanted to maybe expand on that, it could be helpful.
Can you read what the question was?
Yeah, so the recipient would fall into one of these three categories and would meet the strategic goals.
The recipient. So when you submit I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. So when you submit your letter of intent, and full proposal, you have to apply to one of these three tracks. Is that where we're getting at here? Okay. So you can submit multiple letters of intent or multiple full proposals, but when you submit, you need to identify which research track you are submitting that letter of intent to. I think the indigenous fisheries and aquaculture is the only one that is specific only to the SFA focus area. The other two can be either SFA or RCE. We're open to either of those two focus areas. However, we will not be accepting letters of intent that are related to our healthy coastal ecosystem focus area, as we have a lot of other investments in that particular focus area right now. So we're trying to make sure we're digging into SFA and RCE.
That answered it.
Okay, great. No, and I hope what I just said answered your question, Allison. So the question is, can a mentor of a potential grad student applicant also apply for a grant in a different track? Or does mentoring a student bar you from applying for your own grant? So it does not. You are able to submit multiple letters of intent to different tracks. Does a letter of intent need to be submitted by the potential graduate research fellow or the academic advisor? For the graduate research fellows, it can be submitted by the fellow. It's just important to know that for the graduate research fellowships, eventually, if they're selected for an award, the award does go to the research mentor, not to the student, just because we have to have it go to a principal investigator or equivalent at an institution, right? But it is totally fine for the student to be the one submitting the letter of intent, submitting the full proposal, as long as they're going through the institutional approvals that might be required in reviewing budgets, reviewing proposals, et cetera.
Leon, there are two in the chat that I think are pretty important.
Yeah. Are Sea Grant traineeships available for any of the awards or any of the awards? So they are not. The Graduate Research Fellowship is essentially how we are currently, sorry, let me clarify. You can request funding for graduate research fellow or graduate student trainees in the Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture or the Cultivate Award tracks, but we are not providing additional funding on top of the award amounts that were listed there for trainees. Is that how you would answer it, Shauna?
Yes. So for those of you that have been in the years past, you would ask for the maximum and add a separate trainee or, one or two, and that would be in addition to. So I'm just supporting what Leon just said. It's that it needs to be included in the upper max of, in the case of the Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture, it needs to be part of the 150K per year total.
Thanks, Shauna. And then, of course, the Graduate Research Fellowship is for a graduate student to be doing research, right? And then I just want to clarify to the second question that's in the chat. Could you please confirm that the Cultivate Award must pertain to Indigenous fisheries and aquaculture? So that is not the case. The Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture track is specific to Indigenous fisheries and aquaculture projects. The Cultivate Awards could be any range of research topics that fall within either the sustainable fisheries and aquaculture focus area or the resilient communities and economies focus area. We are not restricting it to Indigenous fisheries and aquaculture for that research track.
So can I just add on for if this will help? So if you want to build relationship with a particular tribe, you can use the Cultivate Awards to do that. And it could be fisheries or aquaculture. The Indigenous fisheries and aquaculture is, mainly for people that are ready to do research related to this. So if you can think of these research tracks as 3 separate competitions that are happening at once, I think that will help you. So they are not, they're, yeah, they each have their own, right, focus area emphasis, and each of them have a slightly different, and so the RFP is laid out that way. But so think of them as 3 separate competitions run at the same time.
Yes, thanks, Shauna. All right, and then another question about the graduate research fellowship. So how do the funds need to be split up? For example, can it go toward half research costs or half student support? Is it the same for the Cultivate Awards? So I would take a look at the budget section of our call for proposals for the graduate research fellowship, as well as the Cultivate Awards. We do not outline how you must spend your funds with regards to research. It is most important to be able to justify how the funds that you're requesting are going to enable you to do the proposal and the scope of work as written, because when we have our external reviewers take a look at that proposal, if they can't see how your budget is going to enable you to do the work you're saying you're going to do, they are going to be very critical of that and feel like it's less feasible, right? So if you have a graduate student who is partially funded from another source and they can do the proposed work by only getting part stipend and then the rest of the work is research, and it's clear in the proposal how they can accomplish that, then that hopefully is going to be reasonable, right, to the reviewers. Most of the time for the graduate research fellowships, people are spending that money on stipend, and there's a little bit of money potentially for research. But we don't demand that you have a specific proportion of each. It's more about justifying it well with the project that you are saying you're going to do. And that is the same for the Cultivate Awards. Okay, and then there's a question about marine mammal One health work for the Cultivate Awards, or would that not fall under this focus area? So again, I would take a look at the language in our strategic plan about the Indigenous fisheries and aquaculture focus area, and then the resilient communities and economies focus area, because we are not funding work within healthy coastal ecosystems or predominantly within healthy coastal ecosystems, which I think, you know, from the forefront probably would be what the work you're talking about would fall into, but take a look and see if you're able to find a spot within those focus areas that the work would be applicable to, because I don't know the details of your particular project. All right, I think we'll keep moving on from here. Okay. So for the Cultivate Award, can you give examples of what you're looking for regarding relationship and trust building activities? So there actually is a list of example activities in our call for proposals in that section. So I can just read a couple of those to you, but I encourage you to take a look at those. So some examples would be workshops and outreach events to connect scientific and community partners and engage community members in research, project creation and design. Time for project team and community members to collaborate, professional development training opportunities, conducting preliminary or pilot research, doing analysis or presentation of preliminary data. So you can get a sense, it's about providing opportunities for people to come together to pilot things, but also potentially do some small scale research. The idea is that it does need to be working toward that applied research approach. You're generating new knowledge toward a applied outcome. And then do you know if or when the habitat focus area will be supported? We have run a number of requests for proposals already in that focus area, and there's an offshore wind call out right now, which is also focused in that. So it'll be some time, I think, potentially until we are opening a call for that again. But of course, you can sign up for our newsletter. Hopefully, if something comes up, we'll be able to support that again in the future. Okay, just to keep us on time, I'm going to keep moving through. Thank you all for your great questions, and it's helpful for us to see where there might be some clarification that's needed. So just to give you a sense of our review process, because I think that's really important to be transparent about how these proposals will be evaluated. So you know if it's, of course, like a good investment of your time. Just going to briefly share how that works for us. So we published our request for proposals already, and of course are soliciting letters of intent and full proposals. Once we receive your letters of intent, we're going to be recruiting reviewers based on the topics that are submitted to in the letters of intent. That's how we identify what technical expertise is needed, and then invite people to then be part of our review panels. We onboard them to make sure that they're understanding what our request for proposals is, what it means, what the evaluation criteria are. And then we actually will host our written review, have them complete a written review of your proposals, and then meet together as a technical panel to discuss each proposal. Every proposal is discussed. Every proposal has an opportunity to have scores be revised depending on if there's, new knowledge or disagreements that are then addressed by that discussion. And then we work with the technical panel to outline which projects are meritorious of funding. In this process, we also provide the proposals that are deemed as highly meritorious to an advisory panel. And so in this case, our advisory panel is comprised of a number of state agencies, industry individuals, private organizations that come together and look at whether the proposals that are there also address their needs. So it's really about the state's priorities in ocean and coastal management in these two focus areas. So that gives us another lens to understand how applied is the work that's being proposed going to be. And then based on all of that information we get from the technical panels, from the advisory panels, we then will make a selection of which projects to fund and issue awards. And then that's when the actual research will begin. We, as a Sea Grant program, are required to follow a national competition policy that all Sea Grant programs have to follow. And so it ensures that we have a very transparent and robust, neutral process for reviewing proposals. So our evaluation criteria for this call is listed in the request for proposals. So you can see exactly how you're going to be evaluated. These are the same 5 evaluation criteria that are provided to the review panel, and it's the same language that they receive to evaluate your proposal. So we always encourage people to use this as they're developing proposals to ensure that they are going to be able to be reviewed competitively. We also have a set of selection criteria. So in addition to the information that we receive for them, we reserve the ability to be able to use these selection criteria to ensure we have a good balance of projects that are being selected. So they're not all the same type of project. If 5 of those reviewed extremely well, we want to ensure we have a balance across the areas that we want to invest in, that we're investing across our strategic plan focus areas, etc. So these are also taken into account and can affect which projects are being selected. And again, that language is in our solicitation. Okay, so that's just a very quick highlight of our review process. So if anyone has any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. But otherwise, I want to get into our proposal part because that part is pretty meaty. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So this section is, I'm calling orientation to the proposal. And so this is a little bit down the line. It's after the letter of intent is due. I will talk a little bit about the letter of intent before we dive into the proposal pieces, but I think it's important for folks to understand what this proposal might look like, some key areas that might require a little more time and things like that, especially if you're not as familiar with Sea Grant funding. So first off, our letter of intent is due April 7th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. It is required, you must submit a letter of intent in order to be eligible to submit a full proposal. So this is a relatively low burden as far as We are not requiring pre-proposals, which usually are a higher level of work. We are requiring a up to 2-page letter of intent that describes, your planned approach. And again, the details of what's required is in the RFP. It needs to be submitted via EC grant. We will not be evaluating them, as in we are not going to send them to a review panel and then provide a score and then decide who should proceed. We are going to look at them again to collect that information about the expertise that we're going to need in our technical panel. The only exception of that is going to be if we see that a letter of intent is falling outside of the priorities and focus areas for this particular solicitation. We want to make sure that people are not wasting their time in putting together a full proposal. So that's the only situation where we would reach out to a project team and say, just so you know, this is not in line with the priorities within this particular research call. And so you would not be eligible then to submit a full proposal. I already mentioned that bullet point. And then just lastly, if you do have any significant changes to your letter of intent after you submit it, that should be shared with us. That's important because we understand that it's helpful to have additional time to continue to work with potential partners, to develop your idea, to develop your collaborations, and that is okay. However, if you significantly change your approach, including the area that you're working in, it would be helpful for you to share that with us, because otherwise we may not have the right reviewer to cover the type of expertise you're looking at. All right, and then I'm going to shift to the full proposal. So this is due a couple of months later on June 2nd at 5 p.m. Pacific time. This is also submitted via EC Grant, which is our application portal I didn't mention earlier. These proposals are evaluated based on the evaluation criteria I shared with you earlier by external technical experts. So they are not from California Sea Grant. They are recruited from outside of California Sea Grant, and they're paid an honoraria to do this service. We have 12 required elements as part of our full proposal. There are a couple of optional elements that you could submit in addition to these, but I'll just say that there are 12 required elements. And we just want to remind you, it's very, very important to pay attention to word and page limits. If we see that those come in and they're exceeding the page limits, then we have to redact them. And that's just in order to provide a fair opportunity to all of our applicants that they're having the same amount of pages being reviewed. And we also don't want our reviewers to have unequal or unreasonable burdens in the review process. We also, for the first time, have some templates that are going to be required for the letter of intent and the full proposal. And these are essentially a way to help hopefully reduce some perhaps visual biases that could come into play when the reviewers are looking at the proposals. Some people just format things very, very differently. And so in adapting a best practice from another Sea Grant program, we are going to try using these templates this year to help standardize how these proposals look for the reviewers. Okay, I'm going to go through, again, not all of the elements of the full proposal, because some of them I think are fairly straightforward, but we do have some that are somewhat unique to our application process. And I want to just help give some helpful hints in my experience of over 3 years being in this role to keep you from, tripping up unnecessarily. So the first is that we require in the full proposal this signed institutional cover page. And this is just a screenshot of what it looks like when it's empty. It's the first piece of the project, the full proposal. And so it's very important that you complete all of the different sections within this. So this includes having a space for your project leader, also called principal investigator or other equivalent, that needs to sign in this area. There's a space for co-project leaders to sign. They must be at the same institution to do so. And we have this very important space for an institutional representative. This is someone at your institution or organization who is responsible for ensuring that your budget and proposal are aligned with your institution's policies. So at an academic institution, that is usually someone in the sponsored projects office. But at other organizations, it may be the president or head of the organization. And so we must have an appropriate institutional representative sign here. At some institutions or campuses, it can take 2 weeks to get this review and signature done. So we want to make sure people are aware that you have the right institutional representative and that you have enough time for them to review and sign your documents, right? So that June 2nd deadline might be a little bit earlier for you internally if you need to give them time to review this. And when we say complete all the questions, that includes these questions at the very bottom that are very small. We do have a template for this particular form, so that's included in Appendix C of the solicitation website. And then finally, I just want to highlight here, there's a little financial summary section. When we talk about the budget later on, the totals in these year-to-year and cumulative budgets must match the totals in your 90-4 budget. And that is just the name for the budget spreadsheet that we have. Next up, we have the project narrative. So this is a screenshot of the template that we have for our proposal narrative. The template, again, is in the appendix of the webpage. This is really the meat and potatoes of your proposal. Of course, all of the things you submit are, available to the reviewers to review, but of course, this project narrative is the core of what they are taking a look at, your scope of work, what you're proposing to do. The template, as I said, is required, and there's a lot of language and warnings about what you can and can't edit. We also have a 10-page limit this year. So one thing to think about as you're putting together your proposal components is how can you complement other parts of the proposal package. So for example, we have a separate community engagement plan that is a 2-page limit separate from this proposal, right? So you don't necessarily need to address repetitively things that could go into that plan also within this piece of the full proposal, unless that is a central part of your approach that you need to describe here. So just being aware, it's a 10-page limit, which is a little bit smaller than we've had in past years. Another thing that often is misunderstood or mistakes are made is with regards to the definition of key personnel. So there's a number of elements in the proposal that refer to requiring curriculum vitae or current and pending support documents from key personnel. So we want to be very clear about who key personnel are in our definition of key personnel. So that means principal investigators or project leads who have principal investigator status or equivalent at their institution, co-principal investigators, and associate principal investigators. And so these definitions that I have on the slide are also available in our FAQ document, as there's often a lot of questions about these. But it's just important to note that for anywhere in the requirements where it says key personnel must submit these things, we are talking about these 3 categories: the lead principal investigators, the co-principal investigators, and the associate principal investigators. These individuals have to be evaluated as part of the proposal because in a way, you're saying that this project cannot be done if you don't have these people as part of your project. So we have to have those curriculum vitae or CVs, current and pending support, and the role that they are playing described in the project narrative. If you have other individuals who are part of the project team, so for example, graduate students, in the case of the Graduate Research Fellowship, we will have associated personnel sections in EC Grant for you to add their documents. All right, and then we're moving on now to the community engagement plan. So this is a relatively different, I would say, section than we've had in previous competitions. So this plan is referring to a section that we have in our RFP that's called co-production and community engagement, where we outline, as adapted from other resources, how the level of community engagement and research can fall on a continuum. And so in this community engagement plan, we really want you to ensure that you're answering the questions that we have posed here. So this includes identifying the need of the community partners that you're working with and how the information generated is going to be used by or benefit them, where your research falls on this continuum as described in that part of the request for proposals, and why is that the appropriate level of engagement. We have questions about how you're going to take an ethical and culturally responsive approach, and how your community partners will be fairly and equitably compensated as reflected in the budget. A lot of these questions have come from our work in trying to incentivize and promote community engagement and seeing that it's not necessarily being done in the correct way. And so we're really trying to create a scaffold by which we're getting everyone who's applying to directly address these questions. Okay, so there's a timely question that is the community engagement plan part of the 10-page narrative or a separate document? So this is a separate 2-page document that is not part of the proposal narrative that I showed you earlier. Some quick hints is that we have resources about community engagement and co-production. Please take a look at those. And that, again, this can be an opportunity to complement your other proposal components rather than repeating yourself. Okay, so one question was, does the letter of intent, sorry if I missed this earlier, does the letter of intent require the list of reviewers, or is it just suggested? We do require a submission of, I think it's at least 5 reviewers, and then you have the option if you'd like to include more than that. Okay, I think we're getting toward the end of this section, and then we'll be turning over to question Q&A section. So I want to talk about our budget. So we have required this 90-4 budget spreadsheet, and I know that this is too small to see. I just want you to have some visual recognition of what this spreadsheet looks like, which is a lot of beautiful yellow highlights. This 90-4 document is formatted in a way that we are able to translate what you provide to us into budgets that are required by NOAA and the federal government. And so this is something we would expect you to work with your institutional representative or institution, campus, et cetera, to develop. And if you have questions about how to fill this out, you definitely reach out to us. This is a form that has a couple of tabs that include help information, so how to navigate it, how to add multiple years to the spreadsheet, etc. So definitely take an opportunity to explore this, because probably most of you have not filled out this type of form before. We also require submitting associated budget justification by line item, by year, and so this would be provided in a separate Word PDF document, as there's not space within the spreadsheet itself to include your justification. We do have guidance documents in our solicitation about what types of questions or what types of things we're looking for in the justification, to help you in identifying, what level of detail is needed. But again, if you have questions, you are welcome to reach out to us. And this budget, of course, is a place where your institution's policies are going to come into play. And so it's important to have sufficient time in developing these budgets for your institution to review. Now, these are not huge awards, but it is possible that you may have a situation where you're trying to apply and you have multiple institutions that are involved, where you might have a lead institution who's going to be the first to receive the award, and then you have sub-award entities who are then receiving money from the lead institution, who are all part of the same project. And so in this case, we just want to be very clear about what would be required when you're submitting a budget, what type of things you have to provide for the lead institution, the lead entity, and the sub-award entities. So The lead institution has to provide a 90-4. That's the yellow spreadsheet, remember I showed you, and the justification. Each subaward entity would also need to provide their own 90-4 spreadsheet, their own justification to match that 90-4, and a brief scope of work that outlines what they're going to be doing. This does not need to be longer than a page. It's really just a very brief summary of what they're doing because, of course, it's feeding into the overall proposal. Everyone's work is being encompassed in the original proposal. It's just we have to have the scope of work in order to actually provide an award to multiple entities. Okay, we made it through the orientation to the proposal, and now it's time for questions and answers. So please go ahead and add any additional questions to the Q&A function.
Leon,
And I know we didn't, yes.
I was gonna say there were questions in the chat about conflict of reviewers. Like would co-authors or past students be conflicted reviewers?
So we actually have a conflict of interest, the conflict of interest document or criteria that we use linked in our request for proposals. It's in the, I'm just gonna make sure I find it correctly. It's in the review process section. And I can actually pull this over so you can all see what I'm talking about here. So in the review process section, we have conflict of interest form. And this is the definitions that we use to identify conflicts of interest. So I would encourage you to take a look at that to help you decide whether someone is going to be conflicted or not. We will also be looking at that when we decide who we're going to invite to review proposals. So yeah, I would encourage you to take a look at that. Were there other questions, Tanya? Would a co-author be considered a conflicted reviewer? I believe it depends on the timing. So you can see you may have a conflict if you have or hold a past or present relationship as a thesis advisor or thesis student. Generally speaking, if it is a recent co-author, that is likely a conflict of interest, but you know, it's probably safer to pick someone who you are not, you know, currently collaborating with. Do you have any other questions? This can be about any part of the of what we presented. Okay. All right, there's a question. Are the indirect costs built into the award? So all of the totals that are listed in the request for proposals are to include indirect costs. So that would depend then on your institution's indirect cost rate for federal awards. So for a lot of academic campuses, that's usually a pretty high rate. But some, for example, nonprofits might have a relatively low rate of, you know, 10 or 15%. So it really depends on what your institution's negotiated rate is for federal funds. And so, yes, the maximums that are listed must include indirect costs. Okay, with regards to community engagement, can entities such as a National Estuarine Research Reserve be counted as a community partner? So our definition of communities, let me make sure I pull it up so that I don't misspeak. So for the purposes of this request for proposals, communities can be broadly interpreted to individuals, organizations, businesses, or tribal governments who are outside traditional academic and research institutions, particularly those that are under-resourced by ocean and coastal science funding agencies. So it is a relatively broad interpretation, but I would say that if there's an entity that could be interpreted to be a more traditional research institution, usually the reviewers are, they have to compare proposals to one another. So they might look at something that looks more like a research institution that should, should have good funding for doing research as less of a community, not lesser of a community partner, but perhaps less of a community partner that's in need of this type of work compared to a different one. So I'm not saying necessarily that's definitely going to be the case, but that is the type of conversation we've heard in these types of discussions before. And I just want to see if Shauna is still on, if she has any thoughts on that question.
Sorry, Leon, can you repeat it?
Yes, so the question was, with regards to community engagement, can entities such as National Estuarine Research Reserve?
I did hear that.
Okay,
So that is, it's tough because this is intended to reach communities and entities that we've traditionally not had funded before or supported before. So I think, yeah, it would be something if we've had submissions from entities in the past, even if they're not academic, as Leon, so articulately explained, that even though it's not traditionally academic, if it's researchers and research entities that have submitted, that's not the intent of this particular Cultivate award. So this is trying to reach other community partners that have not had the opportunity to access Sea Grant funding, and to really help also our academic researchers build relationship with those that they've traditionally not have been had the opportunity to do in the past. I'm not sure if it added anything more to that, but yeah.
no, it's helpful, Shauna, just to make sure that you agree with me.
Yes. I did
Um,
hear it. I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
we're still on the same one.
Thank you. Okay. There's
Leon,
another question.
sorry,
Mhm.
before we, I don't want the question in the chat to get buried. It was, can you talk about letters of support for the project? Who can write them, including someone from NOAA?
Okay, so there are two types of letters included in the full proposal. So the first is a letter of commitment, which must come from a community partner. In the case of the Graduate Research Fellowship, that would be from the community mentor. There's also a section that is called letters of support, and these are not required, except for the Graduate Research Fellowship, where it should be the research mentor. But for the Cultivate and Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture tracks, this is a optional letter of support, and it could include community partners, and it could include other entities like NOAA. And so you are welcome to submit those letters of support through that part of the proposal. Good question. Thanks, Delaney. Okay, so there was a question, can a fiscal sponsor be a reviewer? And can you go over eligibility again? So I did paste the eligibility in the chat because I feel like it's very long, and I want to make sure people are able to see it. So hopefully that part will be more clear after seeing it in the chat right now. And the question of whether a fiscal sponsor can be a reviewer. So if you are funded through a fiscal sponsor, that would create a very direct conflict of interest that would not allow that fiscal sponsor to be a reviewer because there's a very clear financial connection between them reviewing your proposal and a potential outcome. Now, again, I would encourage you to think about, for your subject matter expertise, the type of things that you are proposing to do, finding people who are qualified to review that. So it could be someone else's fiscal sponsor, right? Who's used to looking at this type of work. You are welcome to recommend those individuals. They just cannot have that direct connection to your organization. Okay, doesn't matter how similar their proposals are, if submitting multiple for different tracks. That is a good question that I have not considered. They do have different priorities, right? I guess I could see how potentially someone who's submitting to the Indigenous Fisheries and Aquaculture track would be submitting to the Cultivate Awards, but we would not, I don't think we would recommend doing that because you're effectively requesting this money to do the same work. And obviously we see both of those proposals, and that would cause a potential issue if both of them were selected, right? We would still only fund one of those two. But this is it's an interesting question. So again, Shauna, I don't know if you have a thoughts on this one.
Sorry, I was dealing with a dental emergency from a family member, so I'm a little distracted. My apologies. That one I need repeated. I didn't hear.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep calling on you. These are really, really good questions.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how similar the proposals are if submitting multiple for different tracks.
No, I don't think so.
No, you don't think there's like a, okay, well, we'll have to discuss that one and share an answer afterwards.
Yeah. But I think LOI is one thing, but I mean, yeah, these are good. These are combinations that we hadn't anticipated. So yeah.
Okay, and then there's one more question I see in the Q&A. So is there also consideration of resources that different types of academic institutions have access to? So non-R1 and minority serving institutions might have fewer resources for supporting research and students, or is it only considering the community partners with existing resources and opportunity? So we are not saying that traditional academic or research institutions, we are not saying that they cannot apply. That was a double negative. They still can apply, but we do require that they partner with a community partner who meets the eligibility, I guess you could say, our definition of what a community partner is. So for example, if a non-R1 applied and then they said that they were the community partner based on how we're defining communities, that would not be an eligible submission. All right, we are at time. Are there any final? I think we answered all the questions. Okay, I'm gonna have to follow up on this. Allison, I promise I will email you. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. I hope that it was helpful in better understanding our solicitation, and feel free to email us at sgproposal@ucsd.edu. And we look forward to hopefully seeing your letters of intent for this opportunity. Thank you.